have any questions, we're opening it up to you now to ask them. Is there any chance that's a thing that's happening? Yeah?
So one of the questions was how to define intelligent beings, right? I feel like before we can even do that, we need to answer the question, how do we define being human? And I feel like that's a big question that we can't even answer objectively. So how could we even answer the question of what an intelligent being is objectively? But on the question of being human, I want to ask you guys, how would you define being human?
I am curious what you mean by that, because if being human incorporates all the things that we talked about, reasoning skills, feelings, communication skills, and intelligent life, then I guess all of the above would mean being human. But scientifically speaking, being human is simply being what we are right now, being this. I'll let my fellow speakers answer the question as well, but I might want to ask, could you elaborate on what you mean by being human? If you want to respond to that now, you can. Okay, I'll pass it over.
Yeah, I think Cameron's right. Being human is having a certain DNA. So if there's a pile of flesh out there in the desert, you want to find out where it came from, we test it, and it had human DNA. So I think the more important question, and the one that we would be focusing on in this context, would be what philosophers like to call personhood. So being a person probably means that there's these certain conditions that get met in terms of the ability to show empathy, the ability to reason, to have a certain level of intelligence, maybe to have some certain type of form. Some people would argue that the great apes, so the bonobos and the gorillas and the orangutans, are really types of persons, and they ought to be included in the moral community, because that's really what we're doing when we include certain beings in the moral community and other beings that we exclude. And persons are certainly how we would define that. The next question would move over and ask whether or not there can be whatever we're calling meat or carbon-based life forms that count as persons. And I think that undoubtedly that could be the case. And there could be some kind of test that we would have to run, an intelligence test or a Turing test, to determine whether or not this being has these qualities that we predetermined constitute personhood.
Well, I just have a real brief comment. If we're talking about being human as being intelligent, you know, because my beagle's pretty intelligent. You know, I mean, in terms of being able to follow directions, being able to obey a command. But my beagle can't talk, he can't write. You know, so I guess, I'm not a biologist by any means, but I guess if you're inferring that, what does it mean to be human in terms of human intelligence, I would start there first, at a certain minimal threshold of being able to do certain tasks, I guess. I don't know. That's where I guess where I'm thinking about being human.
I guess I like the answer that Blake gave about DNA. I mean, if you want to get really scientific about it, it's our genetic code that makes us human. And you make small changes in it, and you may not be human again. I'm thinking back at Neanderthals in our evolutionary tree. I guess there's a debate today whether they were human or not, but I believe they actually, I think there were, someone actually was able to get some kind of DNA from fossils, and they probably had a different DNA than humans. And I don't think that we should use humans as a model for intelligent life. That's being anthropomorphic again, and I think we should let our minds run free. And think of intelligent life as being almost anything that may not even be recognizable. Thank you.
Hello, hi. I have two questions. One for Dr. Dash. Yes, sorry. I was wondering if you could clarify. You made a statement saying that you, I guess, with colonization and our understanding, I guess, of the native or indigenous people of America, you made a statement that they were primitive people. And I personally would argue against that, but I was wondering what you meant by primitive, because if we're talking about space exploration and other life forms, there possibly could be life forms that are more advanced than us technologically, intellectually, and they might actually see us as primitive. So I was wondering if you could clarify that. My second question was for Cameron. I was wondering if you could clarify, because you made a statement that, in my opinion, was a little bit problematic, where you kind of justified I guess, the results of colonization on the Native American and indigenous people in America, and you said that it was justifiable because of their colonization, another race was able to come in, and other cultures or whatever came from that. So I was wondering if you could clarify that. I guess my point being is just the same way that we can justify the colonization of the native peoples of America, the same can be done if there are, more advanced life forms out there, if they were to come to Earth and colonize us. So I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about the ethics of space exploration when we're talking about life. So I don't know if you could just clarify those points.
When I use the term primitive, I really had some reservations on it, because it's an old-fashioned term that goes way back from a long time ago, and thought it was an okay term at that time. But I think now in the modern day, there could be some connotations that were put that way. These are people that are beneath us in some ways, and I think that's wrong. And I think indigenous, maybe that's a better term. And I really meant, when I used the word primitive or indigenous, let's use maybe the little better term, was from the point of view of technology. And we had high-tech people from Western Europe coming to the Americas. And the people that were living here at that time were obviously not high-tech. And that's what I meant by that. And I do agree with you on one point, that if we go back to the term primitive again, we could be seen as primitive by some aliens from a distant planet, and maybe they would think that, hey, these people down here would make good slaves, or maybe they'd be good for dinner, and to serve back, and so I think maybe they wouldn't even recognize us. They would just see us as some kind of obscure organism. So I do agree with that's a very good point that you made, and I'm glad you made it. Thank you.
And in response to the question that you asked me, I would like to stress the survival instincts of the human race. So when I made my comment about how colonization might have actually been a positive thing, I was speaking more in retrospect than in the moment thing. Since in the long run, now we are where we are in America. At the time, if we were to look at that and think oh, we're taking over this entire group of people because we think the land is ours, then yes, that does sound very terrible. And so, looking back at our motives, I think, firstly, it's important to address, those survival instincts, like, oh, this is mine, I need it now. And furthermore, to talk about space exploration, I sense that in order to determine whether or not we should colonize, even if that is the incorrect word to use, we have to address our survival instincts as to whether or not we should act on those instincts and just take over whatever we think is rightfully ours as the human race. Not totally sure if I directly answered your question. If you have anything to follow up on that, then I don't have much else to say other than like it's not really like it's the morally correct thing to do, but rather what makes sense for us as human beings, as animals, to do when we go exploring beyond what we already own.
Anyone else from the audience that would like to ask a question? Yeah? Oh. Yeah, so we'll stay till 10. If you have a question, or like want to know more something.
Yeah, sure. Come on.
Stop. Blue shirt. You can stop.
Yeah. Like about the definition of human, based like I feel like the stress like a lot on intelligence to be able to like complete tasks or whatever, but I feel like it's like a problematic definition or bright line to make when they're like cognitively disabled people who are like classified biologically as Homo sapiens, but might not meet this intellectual threshold as quote unquote human. So I just like would like a clarification, I guess, from like whoever wants to speak about where does intelligence, like what level of intelligence do you need to be in order to be considered a human?
If other extraterrestrial forms are like humans in that there are some who don't have those cognitive abilities, but most of them do, the majority of them do, then I suppose I would still qualify that being as intelligent life. I don't know the exact numbers of the number of people with those mental disorders. I mean, I was talking about earlier in the debate about how there might be extraterrestrial beings without those empathetic skills, and so here on Earth they might seem like a sociopath. And of course there are other things that seem like outliers, like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And so whether or not we should count those as intelligent beings could be seen as different from saying, asking whether or not these people are human. I'm personally in favor of the DNA argument that's simply like, oh, we are humans and we should just simply consider ourselves as humans because that's how we were built, and there's nothing really else to consider. Just because we happen to be the ones in power doesn't really make us entirely special.
Yeah, I don't see there being an intelligence test at all for some of the reasons that you mentioned. So infants, certainly people when they're sleeping, when they're sleeping aren't particularly intelligent, and they're not able to show you that they're intelligent. So intelligence is probably not the right standard. I think the right standard would be that line between something being purely a thing, like a rock, maybe a tree, and then having some level of sentience, some level of feeling, thought, something that it's like to be that particular creature. And that would be the difference between encountering a being that is more like a rock and a being that is more like maybe a dog or like us. So that's not, intelligence doesn't seem to really play into it. It'd be more some standard or some threshold about feeling or sentience or another standard like that.
Any other pressing questions? Go ahead.
I just have a quick question, kind of similar to what we've been talking about with the intelligence. And I think, in my opinion, intelligence for us is like very relative because we don't have really any basis of comparison between other extraterrestrial life. We can only kind of develop it in our thoughts based on like, you know, like dogs versus humans, microbes and all that kind of stuff. think we're the most intelligent species out there? Do you think there's something else that has higher intelligence and we're considered to them like non-intelligent or kind of like that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there probably is more intelligent species than us. I would hope so anyway. That's all.
I think in order to answer something like that, we could look at what we know about Earth. I don't think that there's anything to suggest, based upon the historical record, the fossil record, the written record over the last 30,000 years, our understanding of Big Bangs and evolution, to suggest that there's any reason to believe that there's anything remotely close to this planet that would qualify as not just a sentient, intelligent being, but any other life form. And again, I'm not a scientist or an astronomer on this, but just with a general knowledge of history and geography, I don't think there's anything to suggest that anything has come to this planet from outside of the atmosphere. So that being said, yeah, we're the smartest species in the Milky Way or the galaxy or whatever.
No, I guess it's an intuitive thing. I mean, and nobody could prove it one way or another right now. It's going to be proof by demonstration when it does happen. From what we know right now, there's no way we can tell. My gut feel is that there are more intelligent creatures out there. And I think, from what I read, that a lot of people, students of evolution, feel that the development of intelligence is a very, very obvious conclusion to the evolutionary growth of species, plural. And it's, probably being intelligent is a stronger mechanism for survival than other things. Good question to ask yourself. If the dinosaurs were killed off by an asteroid 60 million years ago and they survived, would we have intelligence on the Earth? I have no idea. That's a good question, though.
Well, I was thinking along the same lines. I mean, I think if you look at the fossil record, as you mentioned, our species is really the only one that used tools, and that we know of. And that ability to use tools came from developing an opposable thumb, primarily, and that was an evolutionary by chance event. So I think they're not unconnected. And you know, you want to respond to that, please? I think there's too many gray areas to kind of separate them entirely, but please.
I just wanted to raise an interesting point that, for one thing, I think there are other species that do use tools. We have chimpanzees, and not to the same degree by any means. But it's interesting to think that the amount of DNA that we share with a species like a chimpanzee, we share, I don't remember the exact number, but it's more than 95% of our DNA in common with a species like a chimpanzee. So that very small percentage of shifted in a more intelligent direction is us over a chimpanzee. Imagine a species being 5% more intelligent than us. What would they be able to accomplish? What would they be able to do that we cannot even fathom? What could, all of our ideas of calculus and whatever, all the cool things we can do that we don't see chimpanzees doing. Imagine a species a little bit more intelligent than us, and they would blow us out of the water.
Calculus would be kindergarten work, right? I agree. It's a fine line. We do share like 90. I think it's closer to like 98 or 99%. Is it 99? Yeah. So it's subtle differences, but those subtle differences make profound impacts when you think at the level on DNA. What do those chromosomes function as? Clearly there's a difference between Homo sapiens and Homo habilis and chimpanzees in terms of ability to speak, you know? But that's not to say that chimpanzees can't communicate, because they can. They can hire, what's the right word? Advanced organisms, species. Can you tell I'm not a biologist? And I agree. You know, it'd be interesting to find out if we differed only by a couple percent from some species a million years from now. It'd be interesting to know.
I know you have a question, and you'll be the last one.
Yeah. So I want to move. I guess I want to move this back to one of the earlier topics you guys discussed before we got onto questions about intelligence and what counts as moral status, right? And these are the real questions about the costs involved in studying these kinds of things. I don't want to sit here and talk about whether or not this is money that can be better used to help people right now on Earth, right? So I'm interested in a question that's, or a point that a number of you raised about climate change, right? Possibly necessitating us looking for other planets, right? So there's a real chicken and egg motivation problem here, right? So the reason climate change at this moment is happening is because human beings cannot be sufficiently motivated to step back their emissions and take the hits that are going to be required to actually make progress here, right? And if that's true, it seems far more pie in the sky to think that space exploration is going to solve that problem, right? Because the costs associated with that will probably be higher, right? So in terms of a solution, they're talking about, okay, well, what do we do given the fact that our Earth might become uninhabitable at some point? It seems almost irresponsible to even talk about space as being a possibility there, right? Because if we can be motivated to go to outer space and explore new worlds to solve our climate problems, then presumably we should also be able to be motivated to do what's necessary on Earth right now to avoid having to make that choice.
Yeah, climate change certainly is being affected by people, no question. There's no question. But I think you have to also take a broader view. It's not just climate change that could cause our species to become extinct on this planet. So if we have the technological know-how to possibly, maybe we don't need to go to other stars, but it is feasible to reach the moons of Jupiter, like the ice moon, what is it, Europa, and it's an ice moon we think has lots of life underneath the surface. So I don't know if it's necessarily a question of, do we need to explore other parts of the universe because we're forced to, because we ruined our own planet, or if it's a question of, can we, because what if? What if we have massive solar coronal mass ejections directed right towards our planet that puts us back in the Stone Age? You know, if maybe we had colonized another moon or another planet, or maybe made steps towards that direction, then that might be worthwhile. The first part of your question, though, is should we, just because we ruined our own planet? I absolutely agree. We should focus on our own planet first. But we should have a contingency plan, too.
Yeah, and with regard to climate change, we are at the brink of the point of no return. And it's going to take a cooperative effort on the part of the entire world to solve the problem. And I don't see that as happening. I mean, I see a lot of efforts put out for a local community to see what they can do to cut down on the carbon emission into the atmosphere. And that is like nothing. I mean, you've got to get everybody working together, the US, China, India, Europe. And so the carbon dioxide is continually going up. Maybe it's slowed down a little bit because of some countries that are putting out an effort. But it's going to go up, and I personally feel that we are going to hit the fan on this one. And the other thing is that it's not only climate change we've got to be concerned about, it already has happened on the Earth, but it's getting clobbered by a comet or an asteroid. And we've had some close calls. There's can't think of the name, in about the late 20s, early 30s. Well, Tunguska was the place in Russia that got clobbered, and there's going to be a close pass by an asteroid to the Earth. Right now, NASA's saying it's not going to hit us, but it's enough to scare you that if one could come that close, it's going to come between the orbit of our communication satellites and the Earth. And it's an Egyptian word that I'm trying to think of. Maybe it'll come to me later. But these are realities, and I think that there might come a point, even though it sounds like science fiction, that we got to take some action. And we won't have a choice of solving our Earth problems. The U.S. could do all it wants to do if some other countries aren't going to go along with it. And maybe those countries, for who knows what reason, can't do it. And so I think we must seriously consider the possibility of colonizing, if you want to call it that.
Not to go into the philosophical side of this, but I was just thinking that given the rate at which climate change is growing and that we're destroying our atmosphere, I don't think it's even possible for us to develop the technology necessary to move our species to another planet in this specific scenario. So I'm like, if we were to pool resources into both trying to fix climate change before it's just absolutely irreversible and our planet is completely screwed forever, while trying to fund a program that can help the entire human race and maybe other species move to an alternative planet. Like, it's just, it's a little preposterous. And so, like, thinking about it philosophically, I'm just having a little bit of trouble just because it's just so unfeasible. But good fruit for thought, nevertheless.
At least I think someone mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, no, I understand. I was giving my take on it, is all.
All right, so with that, we're going to close out the debate. We'd like to thank all our speakers for coming and all of you for sticking around. Before we go, for anyone interested in space exploration and space science in general, the Copernic Institute, where Dr. Goodish teaches, is an excellent resource that's in the area. It's right over the bridge on Front Street, I believe. And also, the winners of our raffle for the bag of candy, could Ezra and Sarah Lena please come up? And with that, we're actually done.